The New York Times versus the United States. This is a landmark freedom of press First Amendment case. It's also a required case for the AP government test. So the New York Times versus the United States was in 1971. A cry of national security does not justify censorship in advance, and the government does not have the power of prior restraint or censorship of publications. So in this case, the defense, or what Nixon was trying to do, was say this was for national security. The New York Times could not publish the Pentagon Papers or the stories. So Daniel Ellsberg, a high-level Pentagon analyst, released a massive report known as the Pentagon Papers to the New York Times. Nixon's lawyers petitioned the U.S. District Court to order the Times to refrain from printing in the name of national security. In what became known as the Pentagon Papers case, the Nixon administration attempted to prevent the New York Times and the Washington Post from publishing materials belonging to a classified Defense Department study regarding the history of the United States activities in Vietnam. The president argued that prior restraint was necessary to protect national security. The case was decided together with the United States versus Washington Post Co. Required Supreme Court case. There's a video after this that add details, add notes also that's not here. And also just remember, this is a landmark case. And in this case, the New York Times and the Washington Post could publish the stories, could publish this against, the stories that were against the United States and talking about defense issues in the Vietnam War. Another thing to just add, that this is a study regarding the history of the United States activities in Vietnam. This was not something that Nixon was trying to do right now. This was not something that was debating now. This had happened in the Johnson administration, happened in early, 64, 65, and so on. It was a history up until that point. So there's one reason why it really wasn't in the name of national security or executive privilege. It was due to that this was just a history. Now, it was damning. It made the governments look bad. It definitely was explosive. But in this case, the Supreme Court again said that there's no prior restraint or censorship. National security does not justify censorship in advance. The government does not have the power of prior restraint of publications. This is the New York Times versus the United States.